To the Solidarity BPP, Brid Smith, who has 15 minutes. Is Deputy sharing time?
Gurmagut, I will be sharing my time with Deputy Boyd Barrett and Deputy Coppinger should she arrive. She's not here at the moment, okay. So
agreed.
I will do my best to get this done in 5 to 7 minutes. I want to first of all welcome public sector workers and pensioners to the gallery here today for this debate. And I want to also note the absence of an party on Lucht Ibre. Translated loosely, that means the party of the working people, who aren't here at all, and perhaps they're busy licking their wounds after the Jobstown verdict today, but they're certainly absent from the gallery, from the chamber, on an issue that very much concerns working people, and that should be noted. And I also would like people to note the very low attendance at this debate. In fact, we wouldn't be having this debate at all were it not for the fact that Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett, who represents us on the Business Committee, insisted that the renewal of the FEMPI legislation be discussed, because all that's required of the Minister is to come back and tell us every year before the end of June whether he's going to renew it or not. And extraordinarily, it is a piece of legislation that we don't vote on its renewal. It just gets through on the say-so of whatever minister happens to be sitting over there at the time. We vote on the emergency legislation, what do we call it, the Offence Against the State Act every year. We voted on it last week. We don't get to vote on FEMPI. I am going to, however, put a motion that we should be voting on, and again at the Business Committee and with the Taoiseach during the week, there was quite an argument that this would not, we would not be allowed to take a vote on this motion. Now ask yourself, why is that? That is because this is very sensitive and very crucial legislation. It's also very draconian, it's very unfair, it attacks one sector of the working population in this country consistently every year, and it is being pushed as emergency legislation outside of an emergency. The longest piece of emergency legislation in the history of this state. Isn't it extraordinary that we stand here allowing this legislation go through in such a manner without even a vote? However, I would like to say that I am kind of surprised at Sinn Féin. I understand Fianna Fáil are absolutely as blue shirt in their approach to workers as the blue shirts themselves are, but I'm kind of surprised at Sinn Féin's attitude. And I want to make this argument. I want to make this argument for. I want to make.
Stop the clock. Stop the clock.
Well, Count Corley, could we stop the clock? Could we stop the clock, please?
Please don't invite responses from anybody else. You should proceed with your speech and you'll be heard, but please don't go around with everybody else. Make your own point.
Count Corley, that's an extraordinary instruction. It's never heard in this House. An extraordinary instruction. However, I'm told it's your speciality. Okay. So shout me down, but I will continue to make my argument. And what I want to say to Sinn Féin and anybody else who's listened to that argument, unwinding FEMPI in one go, the gentle unwinding of FEMPI, this sort of talk that you can ease out a piece of emergency legislation is nonsense. It must be got rid of, and I say it not just for the point of view that it discriminates and it creates unequal pay and it has kept public sector workers and pensioners, by the way, in a low-paid prison, but it also discriminates in terms of being able to negotiate as a trade union. Because of the penalties contained in FEMPI, unions go into those negotiations with you, Minister, with two hands tied behind their back, and the evidence of that lies in the history of the ASTI and their relationship with the Lansdowne Road Agreement. Absolutely penalised and sent to Coventry because they rejected the Lansdowne Road Agreement. Now, unions are going to be voting on this deal over the next while, and I will encourage them publicly to reject it because it is unfair to them. The pay rises are paltry. By the end of 2020, they will have achieved less than what it is reckoned inflation will be amounted to. And what we are doing with this deal is we are cementing austerity. Millions of working hours will be given for nothing on a permanent basis by workers from hospitals, from schools, from local authorities, etc. Millions of hours given for nothing. Austerity is being made permanent in this deal. Austerity to pensions the pension levy is being made a permanent feature of public sector workers, and therefore it's really important that unions think very carefully. I'm surprised that some of the unions enthusiastically endorsing it, but I'm also delighted that some others have come out and enthusiastically said, please reject this because of the permanent method of austerity that's enshrined in it. Now, that's what I would say to Sinn Féin, and that's what I would say to majority of workers. Get rid of FEMPI so that you're not tying workers' hands behind their back in negotiations. And once you get rid of it, you are then on a level playing field in terms of negotiations. You can then say the high-paid workers should not get the full restoration. Top TDs and top secretaries should not get them, but the lower-paid workers should. The legislation is based on a series of lies. Lie number one, that the financial emergency situation and the recession was caused by overspending on public sector workers. Not true. But the solution to that theory was to cut their pay, their pensions and their conditions. Look at them: nurses, doctors, firefighters, teachers, those who the services of the state rely on. And we were told that they bankrupt the country, so we had to go after them. Their gold-plated pensions? I don't think so. The one person that will go off in a gold-plated pension that I've heard of in this Dáil is Enda Kenny. When he does retire, because he probably will soon, he'll have a very nice pension. The continuation requires more lies, and that is the pretence, as already mentioned, that we're in a financial emergency, and we're not. The gentle unwinding of FEMPI Minister is forcing these cuts. And we're told again that the roof would fall in if we got rid of it, and Brexit has been used to beat us up with it. The most pernicious lie, however, Minister, is that we're told if we restore the rights of teachers and firefighters that we'd have to cut the services. Indeed, 11 beds, and I spoke about this to you before, Minister, have been cut from Lindara because they cannot recruit and retain nurses to look after adolescent psychiatric care. They can't recruit and retain them because they don't pay them enough, they treat them unequally, and they can't afford the rents to live in this country. So you're cutting services by cutting their pay, and that's continuing to happen, particularly in the health sector where it's really relied on. And it's amazing how the commentators who want to go after the public sector don't give a damn about the homeless and the vulnerable most of the time, but when it comes to restore their pay, oh, we can't do that because it would hurt the homeless and the vulnerable, and we have to look after them. And if we give them back their pay, then we have to cut the fire service and we have to cut the health service even more. The hypocrisy is astonishing. The choice is not between these workers and the homeless or the sick, it's between the wealthy, the bondholders, the developers, etc., whose profits and dividends are actually back to pre-2008 levels. The issue is not that the funds are not available, it's that there's no political will available. To give just two examples, we've written off the debts of employers who claimed insolvency and failed to pay their workers redundancy, and we'll be dealing with a redundancy bill later on the same level. We continue to give tax breaks to vulture funds and to real estate investment trusts, and indeed charity status to vulture funds who are worth absolute billions and are making billions out of the property that's been given away to them practically. The real purpose of FEMPI is not to save this state money. It doesn't have to. The state doesn't have to save money on public sector workers. What FEMPI is doing is putting down a benchmark to all workers, both in the public and private sector, that now your rights and your pay is to be curtailed. And to be honest, I can see how it spills over to the private sector, and particularly when it comes to pensions. You take a company like Irish Life, they have a very solvent pension fund, they have loads of money in it, and they're cutting it to bits. The defined benefit scheme is being taken away from thousands of workers in Irish Life because they're taking the example from the top. The fish rots from the head, Minister, and you have given private sector employers a good example of how to go after workers' pay. This is a gross injustice. In the public sector, 4,000 pensioners that are on retirement, that have gone out of the public sector and given their life to it, will die. That's 40,000 workers who have given this state great service and who will never get the restoration of the pay that they deserve at the present rate of the unwinding of FEMPI. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have young workers grappling with rents, the cost of living, and they're now told that pay equality is something we can't afford, and many of them will lose at least €100,000 in the course of their working life. The fact that the recession has seen massive increases in the attack on all workers and precarious employment and low hours, etc. All aspects of what happens in the private sector are here in FEMPI. And by forcing these cuts and using state legislation against public workers, you're effectively colluding in a race to the bottom, and it's all in the name of keeping things competitive.